Hello, and thanks for viewing the recorded version of our client admin training on the SANS Virtual Learning Environment, or VLE. Today's session will be focused on what a new client administrator would have to go through for account setup on the VLE. However, it's also intended for any client administrator who just needs a refresher on the different functionality of the VLE. So with that, we will get started. So you should see my screen now. This is an admin view of the VLE. And I am actually logged in as a student administrator. And what that basically means is there are a couple different roles within the VLE. You can either be an admin, you can be a student or a learner, or you can be both. So the user I am logged in right now is to show you an example of someone who has a dual role and something you may find yourself being, as well as not only an administrator, but someone who's actually taking training as well. Now, you will be set up initially within your account as an administrator only by the SANS Securing the Human Support Team. Note that if you need to add yourself into training to be a student, you would have to add yourself as a user, which we will get into as we kind of go along. Note at default, though, this is not what you'd be brought to. You would be brought as an admin only. Before we jump into some of those things, let's take a look at the learner view or the student view, as you can see as it's labeled here. So we have a link on the top that says show student view. I'm just going to select that. And this is kind of the end goal that we're trying to reach. So this is an example of some mandatory and recommended training that have been assigned. Now you have two ways to assign training, either mandatory or recommended. We'll kind of talk about that a bit as we assign our training assignments or training policy. But the main difference is your mandatory training is based upon your completion certificates and whatnot are based upon mandatory training. So whatever you assigned as mandatory, they'd have to complete those in order to get a completion certificate and what have you. The recommended training now is a nice feature that you could always provide more modules or videos for someone to view, but the idea is that they don't have to complete them to potentially be assigned completion of a completion certificate. The student view is pretty straightforward. If you had purchased multiple languages, you would have that in the language dropdown. Once a user selects their language, it will be remembered for playback. They can actually reset their password. So by default, the SANS VLE will control user credentials, meaning user will log in with their email address always. So email address is the username. If you're an admin or a student, that doesn't matter. It's always email address. But you will manage your own passwords with the exception of some single sign-on customers. So single sign-on is an add-on that can be purchased in the VLE. So that would be using your network credentials. However, by default, the VLE will want to handle that type of ability and will send you a password. So users can reset their password by using this. There's a quick manual that explains playback, though users will just come into these videos and click to launch a video. And you can see you'll get completion status once you've completed, like these say completed. A way to contact a support is the address that you would be setting up on your account as well. So someone that they could quickly mail your team. And really that's it. So since we are in a dual role, we have a bit of additional that we have the ability in the top right to return to client administration. So note that is only for those who are admins and students. Now, if you are that role, you'll always be logged into your highest role, in this case, admin. So you're getting an admin view rather than a student view, but you have the ability to switch over to that. So with that, I'm going to now switch to what is more of a default view. So an admin that is an admin only, we will log in as them. So this is, if you're new to your account, this is the first time you're logging in, this is likely something you're seeing. I am logged in as now a user I've called demo admin, and you can always log out in the top right as well. But this is an overview now of a new account. Now, this is, my demo account already has some things set up as far as sub-accounts and training policies and users. So you would be at a blank slate. However, we'll show you how we would get to this point. Some important things to note before we do is there is a logo in the top left that also shows up on the student view screen. That is something you can customize, and we'll take a look at that. This first heading here is, in this case, my company-demo account is the top level account that is named by account creation. So this will have something with your company name. and it's something you can build upon as a client administrator with sub-accounts, which we will talk about as well. The next thing is managing license. This is if you have purchased and are administrating multiple products or on the VLE. In this case, we have a drop down that we'll see end user and developer and maybe other types of modules, or excuse me, products. If you do change to, and you do have multiple licenses like this, you will have to change to the license that you want to manage first. So there'll be similar functionality between the two as far as how you add users and assign training, but you need to switch to the license first that you want to do that within. Now, users can be part of both, or they don't have to be, but you will have to add them in to each license individually so that they are then assigned training from that license and that library within. That kind of brings us to this, before we get into the left-hand menu where you're really driving through the VLE. On the right here, you can see different module names. Now, this happens to be in the end user product. You can see You Are the Shield, Introduction, Social Engineering, and what have you. This is an ability as administrator right now that you can go and click on these. This gives you a good way to preview the content. So if you're trying to decide what you're assigning as part of your training policy or assignment, this is a nice place that you can go. Now, since you're only an admin at this point, this isn't recording any sort of status as far as completion. It would, however, if you were a student as well, like we saw previously. So note that you don't have to go to the student view to actually go and take your training as an admin. However, it's a nice thing to kind of get used to what your regular learners or users would see. So here you can click on these modules. This will pop up a player, or it'll show you a good way to here to preview the content so you can pick out what you want to potentially assign within your training policy. With that, we're going to go back to the left side now. Now there's this home link here that you can always click to kind of refresh and get back to the home view. And you will notice that the VLE works in a top-down fashion, especially for new account creation, that you can kind of work your way from the top left here and go down. So right away we have account status, and this is giving you some information about your license. By this one says it's expiring end of May in 2018. What you can expect at that point is that you were deployed at some point in May, and that you have license cycles, depending if you're 1 year or 2 year, based upon that date. And that will come into play with what's called a release seats window, which is the one time a year. There's a 2-week window that you will have the ability to release seats and or release users or purge users, if you want to think of it that way, a way for you to kind of bring your account back to zero, reclaim licenses, and kind of start over. It's also archiving training at that point. So the important thing to know about this license expiration date is expect the last 2 weeks within your license cycle or year that you will have that release seats window active. However, if that is not fitting with your time frame, you can contact our support team for further assistance on that. But note it is a once-a-year type of functionality. You also get some stats about seats used at the account level. If you have any users who are queued and seats remaining, we'll get into that as we go and actually assign training and users. But the next thing to look at is this drop-down. Now, by default, you're going to have the one top-level account that we talked about before, in this case called My Company Demo Account. And that will be what you're set up with. And so you will only have that to select from. However, as you potentially build sub-accounts, this will then populate with the sub-account names that you've created. Now, sub-accounts are an important part. They are optional. However, you may find that you have a need to create them. And it's important to note that this sub-account drop-down menu exists. So if you want to manage, say, you can see I have a sub-account. The first one here is called General Users. If I select that, I'm now looking at users who are within the General Users sub-account. And if I want to add users to the General Users group, I need to go here first. So similarly, how we selected our managing license for end user and developer, we also need to select the sub-account that we want to view. So good practice to get in is if you know your users that you're looking for are in, maybe they're in my new hires group, then I'm going to go to that sub-account first. It limits the number of users you're looking at, also puts you on the right path that if you did need to add users into this group, you're already there. So also note that though you may have to go back to the top level account at some point if you want to get an overall view once again. So I know we will talk about sub-accounts more, but that is the drop-down in which you can then select the ones you may have created. There's some more information about sub-accounts and the seats you use within, so that's listed here. Scrolling down, we have account admin, and in this section you can do some of the basic or initial account setup. So if you're still planning to do what you're going to assign for training policy or some other things that may take a little bit more to get in the user rosters and whatnot, you can go into account admin and start making changes right away to personalize the account with some of your branding and whatnot. First one here is customize logo and title. After I select this, you get a screen where you can then upload a different logo if you choose. It does take a JPEG. There's more information about that on our help site. And also a title. So by default, as you create sub-accounts, there's going to be a heading or title that users will see. And it would be then the name of that sub-account name by default. If you want to instead change that, as you can see, I've set my company training. And you can actually see in an admin view, it shows up on the top right. That then can be set here rather than it taking the sub-account name. You can override that. Same thing with the logo. You can modify that, and it can be by account level. So the next thing you're seeing is lock for sub-accounts. This is somewhat of a recurring theme within some of the administrative functions you have available. The idea here is if you create multiple sub-accounts, you have the ability by default to potentially change either the title or in this case the logo, and there's other settings as well that can be different by sub-account. So that can be nice if you've got a couple different companies or regions. Maybe they have different logos or need for different type of communication or what they're seeing. You can do that. However, if you're just creating sub-accounts for reporting purposes, or you determine that the logo and the title should be the same for everyone regardless, you can check this box here, lock for sub-accounts, and it would update the level that you're at and anything below. So typically this is done at the top level. However, it's important to know if you do have multiple levels, as we'll get into, of sub-account setup, if you select lock for sub-accounts, you are potentially overriding settings that lower sub-accounts had already set. So just be aware of what this is. It can be handy. Instead of making multiple changes, you can make them once. But it's important to know that when you see this lock type of functionality, what it does. So all I would do in this case is if I want to change my title, I'd change that. If I wanted to upload a logo, I would go to choose that logo file and hit apply changes. I'm going to go back to home. The next thing down is manage themes. So select that. Manage themes gives you the ability to do some more personalization of the look and feel of the views that your students or learners are seeing. As you can tell, you can change some of the header text. So for the student home screen, the question screen, and even the custom content screen. So different things you can change here, changing colors and what have you, different font types if you want to. And then you can actually go over to the right after you've made your changes and preview. And this will give you an idea of things that you've changed. So didn't make a lot of changes, but it gives you another view. Here's that student view screen again. And you have tabs up here, so quiz page and custom content. These are pages we haven't seen yet, but this is what is a typical process of a student viewing a module. They will have a home screen in which they would select the module. Once they have watched all the content, they'll be asked to answer some questions. The quiz page will look like this. And lastly, as an optional thing that you can set is what's called custom content. So if you decide you've got maybe a policy document that would work with the module or something that you want them to view, you can link them to that. And you can even see here, it says, as part of your assigned training, you're required to view the following information at the URL below. So the user would have to click this URL. There will be a confirm button as well. So this gives you a quick view, but the idea here in themes is that you can customize the text on each one of these screens and get a view for that. As you will see, if there's an apply changes button, that's something to take a look out for. You will have to click apply changes before any of those changes will actually be committed. I'm going to go back to home. Customize emails, we will look at in just a minute, but since we just talked about custom content, I feel like it's a good spot to go to that. So you can see we have add custom content and customize affirmation message. Those work hand in hand. I'll go to the affirmation message first. As we saw on the other screen, there's a link to click on, and then there's going to be below that a message. That message will say something like, I have read and understood the document, but however, you can modify that. And in this text box, you just type in what you want. Now, again, this can be by sub-account, or it can be, across all sub-accounts, depending on how you set this. But note that this message is here, and you would just hit apply changes. Add custom content is the one that ties into that, and you can see I've already got some certain things set. By default, it's going to look these ones that says no content uploaded, and you can add. So let's say maybe senior leadership, you have a special document or that goes along with that. So I would go down, find the module, and I would click add. And you could send them to a site. In this case, I will pick our help site. This is something that you would have to host. And maybe it's policy doc. And note we have this lock content checkbox. So if I wanted to set this for all sub accounts. Now note this only takes effect if you've assigned senior leadership in this case as part of the training policy. But this is setting the stage for this module now. In order to get completion of this module, not only do you have to watch the content, answer the questions correctly, but you also then have to click and view this document to get completion for that module. I won't lock it in this case, and I'll just click confirm. Now note we see this often at the beginning or end rather than on the module, but you have the ability to put this on any module. Now note that there's an apply changes here. So when you see that, there's more changes you typically have to make, and it's grayed out. So you can see there's 2 radio buttons here that one of these have to be selected before we can actually apply the changes that we just put to the senior leadership module. So we have an option to do not alter completed users if new content is assigned, or make completed users view this. Basically, the idea is if you decided that you wanted to put this document after the fact, so maybe you've already assigned senior leadership out, users have already gone through and completed it, do you want them to have to go back and click and view this policy document in this case to get completion? So basically taking the completion away from users who have already completed but did not view this. That is something you can do. But in this case, I will not. I'll put do not alter, and I'll click apply changes. You'll see this is often something you'll see too is you'll get prompted to basically confirm this is what you want to do, and I'm going to click OK. In this case now, I would have added a policy document to the senior leadership module. So as I assign this out, this is now an extra step that a user would have to take. Again, optional, but something you have available to you. Before we go to customize emails, so that takes a little bit more time, another thing you can quickly set up is manage certificates. So if I select that, there's some information here, how you want it to look as far as how it's formatted. That's in the design part here. So name format. You're going to want to change the organization name. As you can see, there's already kind of a placeholder there for you. You can choose a different logo. That would replace the SANS Securing the Human logo. But more importantly is how you want to deliver that certificate. Now, this again ties in with the mandatory modules we saw earlier. So if you've assigned 5 mandatory modules, they'd have to complete all 5 to do this. Now, if you're doing quarterly training or monthly training or something you're going to keep a pending training, you may not want to turn this on until the end, or you might want to decide how you are delivering this. So you have 2 options, and you can do a combination of the 2. You have user display. These will by default be off, but if you check it, this will give a user the ability to download their certificate from their student view screen. So that's something you can have checked or unchecked. And you also have a completion email. So this will send an email to the user to have them download that certificate. Now you note that there are 2 different ways to do this. So you can send on completion, meaning the very moment they complete those 5 modules, then they get this email. Otherwise, you could set a scheduled date. So potentially, if you want it to only send out at the end of the year, you could send it sometime in December. And maybe at that point, you're not turning the user display on. But some different options you have, and if you want to repeat that email, you can do that here. And again, lock for lower sub account. So if you want to make this change, even if you're not using sub accounts now, and maybe you were going to later, that's something you can select if you want. Although it is important to note that as you create new sub accounts, they will inherit settings of its parent sub account. So you don't necessarily have to, but this also gives you a way to note that you're making changes at one spot rather than having to go at multiple. You would just click save to save those settings. So now let's go back to the customized emails we skipped over, as this is an important part. Definitely something you want to understand before you add users to the system. is how the system can email your users. Now, you as the administrator are the one who are triggering these actions. So it's important to know how they send out and why. So right away, we have step one. This is choose who the email will be from. Now, there's a drop down here that you can select users, and they'll be selected from users that you have as an administrator of that account level. So that's important to know as well. Now, you can see I've made a user here called group admin. So this may be something to think about if you have a group address, something else besides just your user who may need to get these emails. That may be something you want to add into the system that you can do actually yourself. Also note that this is changing the from name and the reply to functionality. It does not actually change the from address. All system emails are sent from no reply at securingthehuman.org. However, it will send from the from name that you've selected here, and also if they click reply to that, it will send to that reply to address. So functionality wise, users can use that. However, you need to know that they need to expect a email from no reply at securingthehuman.org. Let me go to our whitelisting guide quickly because it's outlined there as well. But this is something that you want to have a grasp of, and something that also we recommend that you do a pre-announcement before you were to send the welcome email out to let your users know to expect an email from no reply at Securing the Human, and so they don't think it's phishing, and they know that yes, we want you to click this link and take your training. It's going to include their username and password. It may be sending from your from name, so that may look off. If they have an understanding that this is coming ahead of time, that will definitely help you out in the long run. So as we go, you can see here this whitelisting guide is saying within the VLE you have access to send 6 different emails to your users, and they are all sent from no reply at securingthehuman.org. So please ensure this email is on your safe sender list, meaning if you have any type of whitelisting or junk filtering, this is something that all system emails will come from. Important to get that over to the folks who manage your mail servers ahead of time. Okay, flipping back to the VLE now, we'll go back to customize emails. And we'll see now you can actually customize the text of what's in these emails. And you can see the first one is the welcome email. So these things with the dollar signs on both sides, these are all variables that are explained down here as to what will be substituted. So you can expect them to be sent an email with their first name, last name, username, password. Now usernames are always email address. Password is something that the system will generate. And you can see users have to change that password the first time they log in. So it's just a temporary password that once they log in with the first time, they'll be asked to change, and then they can kind of manage that as they go. It would send them to the URL you're logged in as, which should be the vle.securingthehuman.org, HTTPS, this URL on the top here. And it'll have a default signature with your reply to. Now you might want to modify this as well to make it look and feel more like whomever you're sending from. Also, you can change the subject line up here as well. Now note, you can make multiple changes to all these templates at once, and then you can click step 3 to confirm. So we'll go through what these templates mean. And the welcome email is the most important. Now, some people determine they don't want to use the welcome email at all. That is a system setting that is set by the SANS support team. This is not something you can turn off. However, it can be disabled for your account. You just need to let us know. And it's important to do that before you're adding users. As you add a user and activate them, that is what triggers that welcome email. So real important to understand, this is the first email you would expect a user to receive. You as an admin have to add the user in the system and actually activate them for this to actually send out. However, it's something to be aware of as to, when you're planning how you want to do your initial communication. We have another tab here, training update notification. This is a template that can be triggered when you change the training policy. So if you have quarterly training or monthly training, if you're adding different modules, this would be the email they can be sent by the system. We'll get to that. Can't reset. This is like a forgot password email. So a way for a user to get their password resent to them. Actually, we'll send them a new password. And you can modify that. Then we have reports training reminder and reports training complete. This shows you that these are sent from the reporting section, as you'll get to see here. A way to remind users they have yet to take training or they're complete, and this is a completion type of email. and also a training reset. So there's going to be another end of year functionality that you can do, which is called a training reset. It's not necessarily have to be done at the end of the year. You could do that each quarter or however you see fit. The idea with the training reset is that you'll be able to archive training records and keep the users in the system as is. Rather, now you're archiving their training. If you want to assign them new modules or however you determine to do that, this will archive that training and kind of bring it back to a blank slate as far as their training current status is concerned. Now note here too, also we have, again, update all sub accounts below. So we can check this and click confirm. This would update all the templates. Note that you have to select step 1 individually on sub accounts, and that is because you may not have the same administrator at each account level. So we'll take a look at that next as we look at sub accounts. So under account management, our first option here is manage sub accounts. As we spoke of, there are multiple reasons to potentially add these, and you can have administrators at multiple levels. So let's start there. You can have administrators at different levels to potentially give them different access. Now there are only 2 roles, you're either a student or an admin, but you could be an admin at different levels. So we call these top level admins. You can see I'm logged in here as demo admin, but my group admin and different users are here. Or I could have an admin that's potentially at a different level. So if I scroll down, maybe I've got branch A. Maybe you have an admin who's going to add those users in for you and manage only a certain subset. They are at a different level, what I call level 1. As you can see here, actually, you can have 3 levels. So if top level is level 0, we have level 1 for general users, level 2 here, and you can have multiple of all these, and level 3. So level 3 is a child of, in this case, this level 2 new hires. This is a child of the general users, and so forth. So there is a parent-child relationship, and you can have different level 1s. So these are all branch A, East Branch, Executive. They're all level 1 sub-accounts that are a similar level, so they don't see each other. So anyone who's a branch A admin would not see anyone in the East Branch. So if you're the branch A admin, in this case, you can see here, they log in, they only see branch A and anything that would be below that. They have the ability to actually create sub-accounts. So they have the same type of administrative functionality. However, they have a limited view. And if you're locking certain things at a top level, meaning you have a higher level of access, then they can't go in and modify those things. So if you've locked down your completion certificate at the top level, they log in at branch A, it's already set for them and they can't modify it. So that's something to think about, and it goes for other functions that are locked as well. So with that, you can add administrators here. So the first thing you can see is you have manage client administrators. Well, you have add sub account as well, which we'll do, but you can add another admin at your level at the top here by clicking manage client administrators at the top level. And you would just potentially put in a user. So let's make a user called new admin. Make sure you type in first name, last name, email. This will send them the welcome email. Now, by clicking create, that in itself just kind of cues this change. You can see it set something here. So I could click the X and get rid of that if I typed it wrong. Or I could click abandon changes, but I have to click the apply changes button for this to actually commit. So I'm hitting apply changes. This adds a new top level admin at the same level that I happen to be at. Now you can do that at any level, at the general users level, in this case, or at level 3. Now you can only have 3 levels, but you can add an admin at each one of these levels in the same fashion. Also note that these admins that you have then listed are the ones you can select from the name and reply to that we saw in customized emails. So you may have to go in and let's say, in this case, this group here, 3 custom, doesn't have my group admin and I want to send from them. So I just go add existing and I'll pick group admin. I hit apply. And now if I were to go into that sub account, I could choose the group admin to send from. Another thing to note is, we'll add a sub account next. So they'll be alphanumeric as how you're viewing them. So I'll click add sub account. In that case, I'm going to create one called 1-1-new. I'll select my group admin as the admin. Now, since I'm a top level admin, I have access to everything. I'm really selecting who I want to send it from as far as the emails. So here we are. Now I have a new sub account that I've added with the group admin user. However, since I'm a top level admin, I have access to that. And at this point, it's basically an empty container. As you can see, it has no seats. I can actually delete it. When a sub account is in this state where there are no seats or obviously users then assigned, I can actually delete this. You can't rename them. However, you could delete a sub account and add a new one if you needed to. So potentially looking forward, this is something to think about when you're planning is do you need sub accounts? And we'll talk a little bit more as to why you would. So you can see potentially if you got multiple admins and they have different access needs, then maybe you need to create sub accounts for that. A big reason to do this is for training policy. As you will see as we go, we're going to assign our training assignment or policy, what the users have to go actually take, by the sub account, not by the user. So in this case, I have a general users group, maybe a new hires group, and maybe a custom group. Maybe that is a different training policy for each one of those. Now, a user can only reside as a user or a learner or student. They can only reside in one sub account at a time. So you have to put them where they belong and assign your training policies then to that group. Now, users can move. They could go. You could add them to the new hires group initially and then move them or allocate them to a different group. But note that also can potentially change the training policy if you are doing different training policies by groups. If you're not doing different training policy by group, sub accounts can have the same training policy, so that's still okay. But note if you need different training policies, that's something to think of at the very least. Yeah, I'm going to need a few sub accounts for these different training assignments. Another way that you may see here is for reporting. By adding a sub account, you're adding another piece of data to a user's record, meaning this user now exists in branch A or this user exists in the executives. So when you're later looking at reporting, you can go to that group specifically and view the users who are in that group and get a quicker view of those users. So while you can always add all your users at the top level account, you don't ever have to create sub accounts. And you can just do all your training here. That's if you're doing one training policy. You may want to break that up into multiple groups just for reporting, or maybe logically it just makes sense to have your users in different types of groups that you can see them. So that's really the reason, some of the reasons behind sub accounts. If you have any questions, please contact our SANS Security Human Support team. I'll be happy to try to provide some advice and assistance on that. Also visit our help website as well for more information. Now note that this is a group that has 0 seats. As you can see, by default, when you're set up, your seats are up here at the top. You may need to move these down and allocate them, especially if you're having multiple admins. So if you decide, in this new group, I might have 5 users. I need to potentially move some seats here. So I'll click Move Seats. And if you have multiple products, you may have to pick the radio button of the license that you want to move. But I can click in different increments. I can add. So this is kind of subtle. So you can see this 0 here for end user. Go up and you will see this from its parent that it's pulling from go down. So I'll click the plus a few times to get 5 seats. And I'll click Apply Changes. And this simply moves some seats. Now you can always move them back. If I decide, no, I only need to add 3 users, I can subtract a few. So now I have 3 remaining seats, and now I could potentially activate users. Now note that there's this queued users piece that becomes important too. You can queue as many users as you want. So I can queue 100 users if I wanted to, or 1,000 users here in this group, and I can only activate 3 of them. So at some point you have to move the seats. You don't necessarily have to do it right away, but it's good practice to, when you're planning, create your sub account infrastructure as you see fit. Now you may decide as you go on, you may need to adapt that and create a few more sub accounts for reporting purposes or maybe training purposes as well. But so you can kind of develop this, but note that queued users is the other heading here we're seeing. So we have remaining, means seats that are yet to be handed out. Used was if we had users in here who are assigned a license or active, they'd be used. Or then there's queued, so people who are basically waiting in queue that you can upload your roster at any point and not necessarily worry about how many seats you have in there. But again, if you need to activate them, this is something to be aware of. Okay, so that's an overview of sub accounts. Again, part of your planning is really what training assignment do you need to send out? How are you training? Are you doing this annually or in some other fashion? And then potentially, how do I need to make my sub accounts so that that will meet that need. So it's good to take a step back and have a plan of attack before you go in here and add users to the system. Going through this account admin, setting up your emails as you want them to be, setting up your sub accounts is an important first couple steps. And there's one more part of that. That's the next one here, training policy. So I'll go to training policy, and this would now be setting your training assignment. Now note here, this yellow bar wouldn't show up by default. This is because my demo account is in a certain stage, and it's really to kind of show what this would look like as you go. Now you may find that you never use this because you're doing annual training. Maybe after that annual training you release all the users, and so they take one training a year, you release them, and you start over. In that case, you're likely never going to use training update. However, if you decide that you need to add a module here or there, whether that's a monthly or quarterly rollout or just something, a one-off that you're adding a new module that you determine you need to add, as you modify the training policy, you'll have this option. So we'll come back to this. So let's look at how we would set our initial training policy. Now again, you have sub accounts and you can set them. You can go to any sub account specifically and add them. In this case, I'm just going to stay at the top level. By default, this is what it should look like. You're going to have initial assignment as unavailable, and you're going to have a summary then of what that all means as to what you have set up. The initial assignment, you can click edit. Now, we recommend leaving it unavailable, and that's why the default setting is that. This means that by default, if you add a new user to the system, nothing is assigned to them until you specifically state what you want to assign to them. Now, as you can tell, you could change this. You could say that everything is, but really, you want to leave it at unavailable. But that is that initial assignment. So you can see it's telling you, by default, they are now unavailable. So any new user, in this case, has nothing to view. So we want to change this. And how we do that is we go down to module policies, and we're going to add what we want them to take. So let's say, you are the shield, and email and messaging are the mandatory modules we want to start out with. Now again, you can add multiple at a time. You can do them one by one. You can say, oh, I need to add maybe browsing as well and make that mandatory. And as you go, you'll see these counters change. So now I have 3 mandatory modules, and it's telling you how much time that would take for a user to view the content. And you can add recommended in the same fashion. So let's say, maybe the protecting type of videos here, maybe those are good for, home use, that I want to make this available to them, but they don't necessarily have to take that as part of their mandatory training. So I can make those as recommended. So now we're seeing 3 mandatory, 3 recommended, and the rest are the default state of unavailable. Now, as in a type of advanced function, you actually could go in here and say, I'm going to potentially say international travel. I'm going to make this specifically unavailable, which is slightly different than the default of unavailable. This can potentially lock down this module for lower admins. You can see the owner is the top level account. So if you don't have top level access, then you could never assign this unavailable module. And the same concept goes with mandatory and recommended, so that you can say, I have another admin and they need to they have to assign these mandatory modules, and they can potentially add a couple more, but I don't want them to add international travel. So you can lock certain things down because you have a higher level access. That's why it's here. So you could, you could put everything else as unavailable. You could select them all if you really wanted to, but that kind of busies up the screen. So you don't necessarily have to. You can say the default is unavailable. Now I know if someone gets assigned training as part of this sub account, this is the assignment I should expect them to have, these 3 mandatory and these 3 recommended. So again, if you can set this right away and then you start building new sub accounts, it's going to inherit this setting as part of its, inherits all sorts of settings, and training policy is one of those. So if you can set it right away, great. If not, you can always copy these settings. So you can say, no, I'm going to copy now these settings to maybe all my sub accounts. So again, if you can set this up before you add users, that is recommended. However, this can be done at any point. Just note that if you have users in these sub accounts, you're potentially changing their training policy, and that's when you see that training update type of notification. So maybe I just need that, my new sub account I made, I want to make sure it has the same policy. So I'm going to click OK. I'm going to copy the settings from this sub account to this sub account. And it'll tell you if you're going to affect users, it'll tell you. In this case, I don't have any users in that new sub account, but it's saying you're affecting 0 users in this one sub account. So I'm going to proceed. Now we're seeing this because of past changes. So this is on a counter or cycle, if you will, that if you have changes from another change you made previously, it's going to continually remind you, hey, potentially you have some changes out here that you didn't tell your users about yet. Their assignment had changed since their initial assignment. So with that, if this idea, so let's say I have a user now in this account and they've taken training, and now it's next quarter and I need to assign a couple more modules. I'm going to go say social engineering, social networks. These are now going to be mandatory modules as well. So in the next quarter they log in, they may already see completion status for the modules they should have hopefully already taken. If they didn't, they can always go back and still view those as part of what's on their student screen. But now they've got a couple more, and we've now have the ability to send them training update email to say, additional training has been assigned, or whatever you make that template say. So at which point, this is looking forward a bit, but the idea here is you would click notify users. And it's going to tell you, here are the users who have their training policies changed, and here's the sub accounts they sit in. In this case, since I had multiple changes before, I'm seeing that here. So if I decide, no, I'm not ready to send this email, I'm going to say not now. And this will keep the counter going. If I wanted to dismiss it, I can dismiss this just to get the notification off my screen, or I can even clear the list. So if I don't want to see this anymore, I would click clear list. Back to home. And note then, going back to training policy quick, that if you had different training policies because different groups needed such, so the custom group needs something different, you can specifically go there. So you could still copy settings. If here are my core modules, I'm going to copy to each sub account. Now maybe I need to add a few more. So you can just add, maybe this is the help desk group. You can add specific modules and change them by sub account here if you need to. Otherwise, if you need to copy settings and kind of make them all look the same, you can do that as well. So the idea here behind sub account is, in training policy, you're assigning the training assignment to the group or the sub account. If a user is then in that group, that's what they get assigned. And it's nice then because later on you can always say, if you ever need to look at what people are taking, you can always go, yeah, I know my new hires are taking these modules. So it gives you a quick view of that. Okay, back to home. Let's go looking at adding users. So we just, we made a new sub account today. I click add users. Now if I click add users right here, by default, again, it's going to be at your top level account. You're going to add a user to that top level, which is okay, but not necessarily what maybe you want to do. In this case, I want to add a user to my new sub account. So I'm going to go find that. Here it is at the bottom. I'm going to switch that sub account first, and you can see that changes the name up here. So now I'm going to click add users because I want to add a user directly to this account. So that's best practice. If you can get into the idea of changing your sub account first to whom you want to administer, that's really the recommended way. So I'm going to add a user. And we have two different ways to add users here. I'm going to show you the template file because we have, basically, as you're seeing here, you've got upload batch users or add single user. Same principle, it's just how many users are you adding. So we'll look at the single user first because it's on the screen. So you can see first name, last name, email. These are required fields. You have to have those as part of it. The email is the unique identifier in the system. So users are identified by their email. It's also their username. If you're single sign-on, you may have an additional field here called UID. Often that is the same value as your email address. Not always though. So contact your support team for further help if you are a single sign-on. Then you have your own reference and department. And these are really used for reporting. These will show up in reporting. You can filter by them and what have you. So those are the fields you're limited to. Note that by adding them into this sub account, I'm basically adding yet another data point to a user. So they are now in this new group. So think of this was executives. I don't necessarily need to put that in your own reference or department because I'm already recording that in their sub account. Also note that by default are going to be queued. So going back to what we saw in sub accounts, we can add a bunch of users in. They can all be queued and basically be ready then to be activated. Once they're queued, nothing at that point is being assigned to the user. They don't have a training policy. They don't have a license. Not until you actually click activate will they be in there. But if you're getting an export file from HR, you may want to upload them all at the same time, and then later on choose who's ready to be activated. So I could queue a new user here. I could also then upload multiple users. So you can see there's download blank batch users file here. This is a template file you can download. And we're going to be adding the same 5 fields. Actually, the file looks like this. So again, the same 5 fields we saw, first name, last name, email. What to know about this is basically take your export and copy paste into this format. So start at row 2 and start putting, you don't have to put first name, last name, email, but you can also obviously put some additional information. You can't add any more fields. We can't change the order of this. So if your data comes out last name first, instead of first name, last name, yours is different. You can't change that. So you don't want to do that. Rather, you want to manipulate your data so it fits this format exactly. As a matter of fact, leave this top row as is. So do not modify the text at all. Leave that as is. Just copy, paste your data, and save it out as a CSV. So you can change the name of it. In this case, it's called blank user, but you could change it to something. Matter of fact, I recommend storing those if you can, so you have some record of users you uploaded. Now, you can always pull those users from the system, but it's another thing that you can quickly reference. So that's really all to know about the data upload. It's pretty straightforward. Just leave it as a CSV and start adding your information at row 2 in that format. So if I had multiple users, I would use that, and I would choose the file and send it over, and I would leave them queued, and it would work very similar to what we're about to do as a single user. So we'll add a user here, Richard Richards. Maybe they are help desk IT. So I'll add this user, and I'm going to queue them. And before, it'll say you're about to add the user to the queue for activation later. So it kind of gives you an idea of what you need to do. I'm going to confirm that. And now they've been added to the queue. And it even tells you no welcome email has been sent out. You have to activate them from the queued users page. So a call to action about what you have to do later on to get this user actually in the system. So again, the end goal being that we've assigned them training. They can log in and take that training. We're not quite there yet. We actually have to activate them. So with that, let's go and do that. So I can go to manage queued users. We'll skip down a bit, add users. So allocate users. Well, before we do that, let's look at allocate users. Now, when I click this, it's going to give me an error message because it's saying basically you don't have any child subaccounts that you could ever allocate to. Make sure you're at the right level. Meaning I'm at a level that doesn't have any child accounts. I need to go back to my top level so that I can see everything. So I'm going to click allocate users. In this case, and you can see here's Richard Richards that we just queued, and there's a little star by him because he's queued. If I put him in the wrong group, I could always move them at this point. So I can move active or queued users. The important part to know is if you're doing different training policies by groups, make sure you understand what training policy you're potentially moving them to. Now in this case, this user's queued, so I can move them because they haven't taken training anyways. So I can move them anywhere. So in this case, let me say, yeah, they actually need to be in my custom group here. I'm going to move this user. So I can click and move. You can move in different ways and highlight in different ways. I click apply, and now that user is moved over. Now if they were already active, again, that would take their seat as well. So this message on the right is saying, make sure you understand that you're moving a user to a new training assignment. So read through that as well. Back to home. I still need to activate the user. Now, again, best practice, find the group that you need to activate them from. In this case, I put them in the 3 custom group. And I'm going to go to manage queued users now under user management. So here's my user. Now you have different ways, again, to select. If you have multiple, you could select all. I would select all the people you're going to see here. I only have 1, so I could just check this box. Similarly, you can view at a higher level. That would then show you different grouping or sub-account names. I could select everyone in that sub-account name. So these different boxes here are just really ways to get these boxes by the user selected. So in this case, now I have a queued user who I could activate or I could remove. So if I'm looking at this and see, maybe I typed their email address wrong, I may want to remove them at this point. If I've got my training policy set, if I understand my customized emails, I have it set for the account they're in, I could activate this user now, and I will. So I'm going to click Activate Users. This is going to say you're about to activate one user and send out the welcome email. So keep an eye on these messages that will show up. I still have one more thing to check here, and that's the Confirm button. I'll click Confirm. Then I'll say this process will take a large number of time. Now this is only one user, so it goes pretty quick. If you're activating, hundreds or thousands of users, this may take a few seconds to a few minutes, depending on server load, what have you, how many users you're actually processing. Let that process complete. You'll see your window, actually spinning or doing some processing. Make sure you let that complete, and then you'll get an idea that yes, users have been activated. Once you see that, we can go back to home, and now at this point we'd have a new user. So let's actually go find that user. Now this is in a different grouping of a different training policy that we looked at before, but we can go under user profiles and let's find that user. Now, under user management, I'm gonna go back home for a second. You've got a couple different ways to view the users: show all users and user profiles. Show all users would do what you would imagine. So you can click and it'll show you all the users. Now, depending on what sub account you're at, you may not want to click that on the top level. Rather, if you know you only got a few users to look through, you can get a view of them. However, there's another way you can, and a preferred way was under user profiles, because you can actually select and filter who you're going to look for. So if I knew, I need to look for Richard, I'm going to click search, and here he is. So you can see some information about him. The status, he's new. I can click view user, and you can see an email history. So they got the welcome email at this date and time. This time stamp is in GMT time. So 0 offset, that you can see when they were sent this email. That's important for troubleshooting. If someone didn't get the email, you can look to see if it was sent, and also then check your whitelisting to make sure it was delivered and or not in their junk mail. You can even see their training assignment here. So if I click the training assignment tab, here are the modules I've assigned to them. You can see I actually added that senior leadership here today, so now they're showing that as well. I can send them a training reminder from here, but also I can also edit or set the forgot password email. Now you don't necessarily have to do that. Users can do that themselves on a login screen. However, you as an admin can do that as well. You can click edit user, and if I need to make any changes, I can do that here. So in this case, this looks correct. I've got a new user. They have a training assignment. And you've then got this user to that state where now once they get the welcome email, they click, they log in, and they can take their training. Let's go back to home and see what else we have to click through. Assign user training. This is an older way to assign training that I'll click on quickly. However, this is not something we recommend you use. Rather, training policy is a better way to assign your training to users. This could potentially be used for maybe some one-off training where maybe Richard also needs to view another one of these where I can click a radio button. But really, this is not something that you should have to use as a new admin. If there's any questions about that, please contact your SANS support team. But really, you need to be using training policy to assign training. So back to home. Let's look at manage inactive users. Now I'm going to go back. We'll leave. So note that I'm on this group here, this custom group. So if I want to view everything, make sure you may have to go to a parent level to see more users. But in this case, I'm going to stay at this level. I'm going to click who's inactive in this grouping. Now, how licensing works is this user, Richard Richards, you can see he's in here. He's considered inactive because he hasn't actually consumed any content, meaning he hasn't logged in. And if he's logged in, he hasn't completed any module. So he hasn't viewed a video in its entirety yet. Once they do that, a user would have consumed content and would no longer be considered inactive. So it's important to note that when you're looking at licensing, figuring out how many licenses you need to hand out, how licensing works as far as when that license is no longer available. So under inactive, at this point, you could remove users. So if you have someone, maybe Richard Richards, we activate him and the next day he's no longer with the company, you could actually go in here, select the user, and I could remove them, which would take back that license for you could reuse. and it would then basically purge him from the system. Since he has no records he hasn't completed anything, there's nothing to archive. So important to note, when you're removing a user here, if they've never done any past training, we are just simply removing a user from the system. Any other things like training reset and release users who are dealing with users who have actively taken training, even if you can remove them from the system like a release seats, it still archives training. In this case, though, since there's nothing to archive, it just removes the user. So this is something you can come look for if you need a couple extra licenses. You may be able to remove someone from the inactive pool here. And note this step 1B gives you the ability to create a CSV file, which would just be a listing of email addresses. That would then potentially be a quicker way to select the users if this list was very large. So let's manage inactive users. User profiles we kind of already looked at. There's a way to find users. Note that you could just click search too without having any filters and find everyone. And you can export. So if you want to see who's in the system, depending on what level you're at, you'll get different results. So if you want to see everyone, again, something to get used to is go back to your top level, or at least the top level that you have access to, and then click user profiles. And if you were to click search, you would get a much larger set of users. In this case, there's only 29 users, but. Okay, lastly, we're going to look at reports. We have summer reports and historical training. Enhanced report is yet to be released, but I have early access to it here in this demo account. So let's look at summer reports. This is a way that you're going to want to see how your users are progressing so you've already assigned them training. Now you want to see as administrator, how they're doing. The breakout report, I can run that. It gives you a quick snapshot of users when they started, if they're completed. And you can export this out as well. So it gives you some basic quick information. Go back to reports here, and I'm going to run the account details report. As it sounds, gives you some more detailed information. And this is where sub-account starts to come into play as well. A quick way to potentially get to a specific set of users. Let's say, for example, you start to see, here's my level 1, my level 2, and you've got multiple levels. You may have to click, in this case, general users has a couple underneath that. You can keep kind of drilling down. But if I know my executives, I want to keep on top of their progress. I can see I've got 5 enrolled. Of those, 2 have not started, 2 are in progress training, and 1 is completed. So if I want to find the users who are maybe in progress, I can click on that number 2 in that column, and I can see who those users are. And I could potentially send them an email if I wanted to. I could send them that reminder email that we saw before in the customized email templates. But you can also kind of click to see, where are they at, which modules which ones are incomplete. So senior leadership in this case is incomplete. So you can get some more details. You can export data at different levels as well through here. Also note, under reporting, you have access to historical training. So I'm going to click on that. Now this, as you might expect, can be viewed for users who have maybe been released, or maybe users who are not necessarily actively taking training now, but were part of your account maybe in years past. This is where you can go to find them. So you can put in your training cycle here. So let's say you had a training cycle starting in January, and maybe that was in 2015. And that training cycle maybe ended in July of 2015. So you can quick type in dates here as well. So I could click all these sub-accounts, or only the sub-account I knew they were in, only executives, and click search and get some results. Note here that you have active training. So by putting dates in, you're not going to find, older dates to include active training. You won't get results. However, you could use this as another way to get some more data by your active users. So historical training has kind of 2 purposes. We can find any archived training records. It can also search for, current data. So since this is a demo account, there's not a lot of information in here to find the reports, but let's see if I can't find a few people who have taken training here in this year in this account. I'll just select all, and I'm going to make sure I include active training. So I want to see users who are currently in the system. I want to include them as well. So this will look for both in this case. If I only want to look for those who were, archived, I could potentially uncheck that. This may take a minute to go through. And you can see here's another way to get information. by module. You can see, in this case, Jeff Black has these modules completed and different things like this. So you can export this to a CSV file and then filter this data out. So that's important to know. Okay, back to home. Lastly, we're going to look at end of year type of things. So release seats, you can see that's actually grayed out. I don't have access to that. Note that's going to be active at the end of your license year, and contact support if that window is not working with your schedule, although it's once a year. That's going to bring you to a screen where you could later on purge all the users. Reset training is a very similar screen, so we'll click on that, where you can simply archive and reset the training progress, meaning those who have completed. Now we're going to say we're going to archive all that training and potentially we're starting new, meaning maybe I need to change up the training policy so they have a new set of modules. Maybe you want them to watch the same modules again. Either way, if you want to do that, you need to use a training reset. Release seats is going to look exactly like this, except for instead of sending a reset type of training email and doing that functionality, we're also releasing the users or purging them from the system and then allowing you to reassociate that license. Now you can add that user back in the next year with the same email address, and it will continue to archive the training records to that individual user record. But release seats gives you the ability to remove users who have locked in that license for that year. And all you would do is select the users that you want to release, or in this case, we're looking at a reset. And I click reset. Note that there's an option here to send the reset email that goes to that email template. If I didn't want to, I would uncheck that. So note the system emails are controlled by the administrator. You just need to be aware of where they're at. Okay, lastly, before we end, note that we have some of our important help topics right in the VL here for you. So our help website, at help.securingthehuman.org, is here for you for quick access. Now, you will find many resources, including guides and different information and different security awareness resources that you can add to your security awareness program. Different things to try to ensure the success of your program. This is a good place to start. If you need help, you can even get instant answers here. This need help is a good spot to find other answers to questions administrators like yourself have asked, and it's categorized into different groups. You can see how do I send completion emails and what have you. So go through here, take a look to find an answer. That tool is actually also here. So at your access, so you don't have to remember different websites, you can type questions here. What do I whitelist? Whitelisting guide. So similar questions you'll get answers to. If you're not finding enough information, you can click email, fill in your name and your message. This will send off to our support team, and you can get help from our support team as well. So with that, I'd like to thank you for viewing today's session. Please let us know how we can be of assistance and contact support as needed. Thank you.